Welcome to Lord of the Rings Weekly. I'm Drew Kreisman.
And I'm Ira Kreisman.
And on this episode, we continue our conversation on the Fellowship of the Ring. When last we left our heroes, well, you shall not pass, and all of that, right?
Yeah, it's great.
That is where we pick up, and there's actually a lot to discuss before we can really move on with what happens next in the film, because there's a lot surrounding this one incident, some of which we glossed over and some of which we just haven't really had the opportunity to get to yet. So Gandalf has just been pulled into the abyss by the Balrog, and I guess, Ira, let's start with this one. The last thing that he says before he disappears is, "Fly, you fools."
Right. So obviously that means he's trying to tell them to take the eagles to Mount Doom,
right.
And then drop the ring from a very high height, I imagine, and get it, just dunk it, swish, nothing but lava, plop.
As you were describing that, you made me think two things. One, that's just a very American ideal, and two, the end of Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Atomic Bomb, when the guy's fallen off of the, just imagine he's riding one ring instead of the missile into Mount Doom, right?
Nice, very good.
But yes, I again, as we've talked about, other Middle-earth scholars greater than us have, I think, debunked this a little bit over the years about why it wouldn't make sense to just fly, through the air when the enemy has a giant eye watching all things, and sure, they do have flying beasts who could take down eagles as well. Like, this needed to be a covert mission. I think the movie solves it pretty well. It was always funny to me that some people read a little extra into this, that he was talking about the eagles. He's just telling them to run away, but in a flowery Tolkien wizard type of way. Another thing I wanted to mention, as the scene essentially transitions now into this very emotional series of moments, and the music gets really emotional, and Frodo screams out "no," and all of that, and they have to stop Frodo from rushing in to try to help Gandalf, because what if the Balrog got a hold of the ring? Goodness.
No kidding.
Right? So we can't have that, so they've got to pull Frodo away, and this is all very emotional, right? Now, some people might ask, and this happens, there's a conversation we have a lot in fantasy storytelling, right? Is all of this emotion undercut by the fact that Gandalf comes back in the next movie?
Right, yeah. So I don't think it does, right? I do think that it's worth thinking about, if death is not permanent in your world, then the stakes of do they live or die become less, and I get that. But we've also talked about how living or dying aren't necessarily the only stakes.
Right.
And certainly nobody else here knows that, just because it's the end of Gandalf the Grey doesn't mean it's the end of Gandalf. And they don't know that he is, formerly a Maiar, or maybe they're still Maiar, I don't know. That he has powers beyond what they understand. I mean, they know that a little bit, I guess, but the point being that for them, in the context of the universe, in the context of this story specifically, it means a very great deal. So I don't feel like it's undercut. But I do understand how maybe some people might feel that way if, for them, the greatest stakes in a story are, do they live or die? Yeah,
so I have a couple of thoughts on this. And again, I'm going to compare to some other fantasy fiction, especially right now with an interesting conversation going on around Final Fantasy VII Remake. And without getting into too many spoilers, there are conversations about, are there some characters in that who are alive who were previously not alive? And is there going to be a key character in the future who may remain alive instead of dying? And what does that do to the stakes, right? And particularly with the characters who might come back from something. I think it's really important what you said there, is that we've got to recognize the feelings of the people inside the world. I was reading something, and this is pretty common, and I'm sure you've seen it in a lot more spaces than I have amongst like novelists and writers and things, but your characters aren't omniscient. They don't have the perspective of the reader, and you can't write them as though they do. And the fact that Frodo and Sam, really all of the hobbits, really everybody here is totally, obliterated by this matters. It really, really matters, and it should matter to us and how the characters are feeling in the moment. Like you said, they don't know what may come in the future, and so that still, for me, to this day, doesn't lessen the emotions of watching them go through this. I did a conversation recently about Stranger Things, and the first season is built all around this missing kid who we've basically never met, but we care about him because we care about his family and their plight to save him. So I think in that same way, I feel like I would push back and say, even if death to you is the biggest stakes that you can have in a story, and so bringing somebody back, you would say, totally undercuts that, I would still argue that it doesn't, because of the other characters around the person and their feeling in the moment that it happens. And then secondarily, I would say, and again, I think this is true of most cases in fantasy fiction where this happens, where someone dies and then comes back, this version of Gandalf dies. And I think this story does a better job maybe than some others of making an obvious, like he even changes colors, right? He comes back, right. He doesn't remember his name, all that stuff, and we'll get to it when it happens. But he's not the same thing. And then the more you know about Maiar or whatever, there's a perfectly logical reason, then you get into all of that. This isn't just bringing back Frodo from the dead or something like that. There's a built-in reason. But beyond the logic of it, I think it's important to recognize that this version of the character does sacrifice himself, and you lose something, whether it's, characters in Game of Thrones who come back, characters in Final Fantasy who come back. You lose something when you die, even if you come back. And some stories could do a better job of selling that than others, but that's another reason why I don't buy a lot of the argument for people who hate this kind of stuff, like characters have to stay dead for your story to have an impact. Like, dying at all is still impactful. And I don't want to undercut that. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And I think this comes up in another way in time travel stories or in flashback stories. So when Black Widow got her movie, right after Infinity War and Endgame, it's like, oh, well, we already know she survives, so it doesn't matter.
Right.
No, the story still matters. There are still stakes, just because the stakes aren't life and death for her. It is still about what she experienced, her trauma, her stakes with this family she had, this spy family, right, and Elena and all of that, and it is important.
So the very large humans, certainly compared to the hobbits, is right. They scoop everybody up and everybody runs out of the mines, and we've been in the dark for a very long time, so there's kind of a relief of being out in the sun, and anyone who's following along with Rings of Power understands, the even extra relief of being out in the sunlight. But of course, the incredibly heartbreaking music, and there is some acting going on here, by the way.
No kidding. Capital A.
The final shot, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but because, Aragorn starts kind of demanding that Boromir get everyone up, and by the way, here's this word again. He says, give them a moment for pity's sake, pity again. But Aragorn makes the point that, again, by nightfall, the sun's not going to protect us forever. The orcs will be here. But as he turns and looks at Frodo, man, the single tear, eyes of sadness, that there's is, I don't know, an inch and a half away from being the corniest shit you've ever seen. But it's so earnest. It's so real. The way Elijah Wood just looks directly into the camera and just is absolutely devastated that his friend, forget the Maiar, the Gandalf, the Grey, and all that crap, just his friend just is gone, and it's all right there in his face. It's heartbreaking.
And even the folks who don't get the close-up, like Gimli looks like he's ready to run back in there and throw down with the Balrog, and Boromir's got to hold him back, right? And even Legolas, who's very chill throughout all this, looks utterly lost.
Yeah.
It's all
Jeez. Yeah.
jeez.
Actually, the way that Orlando Bloom does, like, you would think Legolas, of all the things that he's seen in all of his years, but I think that's one of the big things that sells it too. He's been so stone-faced, so stoic throughout this, so in command and in charge, and not really shaken by anything, and he looks shook.
So at Aragorn's insistence, they get the hobbits on their feet. He calls to Gimli and Legolas, get them up. Boromir, get them up. And he like picks Sam up and puts him on his feet and gives him a pat on the shoulder, and off we go. So they're down off the mountains. They run through the meadow and into the woods, and they're heading into like the super impressive elven woods. Like Legolas is an impressive elf. Don't get me wrong, but I'm pretty sure he's a wood elf, and the elves we're about to meet, like his place is Rivendell, and those are the wood elves, and we're going into Lothlorien, where the high elves live. Most especially Galadriel is as the footsteps of doom. You bring great evil here, ring bearer. All right,
Yeah,
easy
he told
now.
me to. Come on. Yay.
And then Gimli gets to be the butt of a joke here. Well, here's one dwarf she won't ensnare so easily. I have the eyes of a hawk and the ears of a fox. And he's immediately held at arrow point. And the
Classic.
elf, whose name I can't recall, says, the dwarf breathes so loud we could have shot him in the dark. Like, all right, don't be a dick.
It's Haldir.
Haldir? Okay.
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, he shows up later. Like he plays a
Yeah.
part later. He's got a small part, but it's not insignificant.
Right.
So there's a bunch of elves here, and our fellowship is surrounded immediately and taken prisoner. And they're taken into a particular place in, I'm pretty sure it's Lothlorien, and Haldir, I guess, the elf in charge, is having a conversation with Legolas and then with Aragorn in Elven. And Gimli says, so much for the courtesy of the elves. Speak words we can also understand.
Yeah.
Which is not wrong necessarily. I mean, I get that they're all friends and they all, or friendly anyway, and they all speak this other language. But deliberately leaving people out by speaking a language they don't understand is typically considered rude.
Yeah.
Not always possible to include everybody with a language, but if you can, what are you doing? And the elf in charge says, we have not had dealings with the dwarves since the dark days, which must be a reference to a thing I don't know.
Yes.
I imagine like an actual fight, because it's not just a rivalry. I keep calling it a rivalry, but like they actually fought wars against each other.
Sure.
And Gimli says something in Dwarvish, and Aragorn's like, that was not courteous either.
I love that he speaks both.
Right, yeah, he is like Gandalf, right? I used to know all the spells of all the tongues.
Mm-hmm. A learned man of many books.
So Aragorn and Haldir fight in Elvish about what needs to happen next, because Haldir's like, you can't go any further. You're bringing the evil ring into our place. The enemy knows you're here. It's all in Elvish, and they don't translate all of it, but it's pretty clear what's going on. And then we get a nice moment between Boromir and Frodo, where Boromir says, Gandalf's death was not in vain, nor would he have you give up hope. You carry a heavy burden, Frodo. Don't carry the weight of the dead.
Yeah. Really good moment for Boromir.
And we've talked about this before. It's not that you want to forget the people who died. Absolutely not. But you can't carry the weight of that with you all the time. It's exhausting, for one thing.
Right.
I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but last year, one of our assistant principals died very suddenly, just in the middle of the school year. And it was hard. And I knew her. I worked with her. She wasn't one of my best buddies or anything, but I really liked her, and I really liked working with her, and I thought she brought a lot to our school. And to have her just suddenly die it was terrible.
Yeah.
But you can't carry that all the time, or you can't do anything. So every time I go to the administration offices, they put her picture up, right? Because that's what you do when something like that happens. And it's nice to remember her. It's good to remember her. But I think Boromir's right. You got enough going on, especially in a time like Frodo's dealing with. You can't carry all of it all of the time.
Yeah, especially when, like Boromir says, you do have this other huge burden that you're carrying. That's quite enough to deal with. So, but I love that he doesn't downplay the heaviness of either burden. He just tells him, it's going to be too much to bear. And then Haldir comes back after the politicking in the corner with the guy who very subtly keeps showing why, again, if anyone should be king, it's probably him. And decides to welcome them to the heart of elvendom on earth. Easy for me to say. Elvendom. He says, realm of the Lord Celeborn and of Galadriel, Lady of Light.
Yeah, it's interesting that Galadriel's husband is kind of in charge, but she's the one who gets all the screen time.
Yeah, Celeborn's barely in this. Like, I've seen some videos, I'm like, who is this guy? And he's got an interesting story, but, like, not nearly as interesting as hers. So, that's just how that goes.
And man, they really do a good job of showing just how awesome the elven city in the forest is. Like, Rivendell was beautiful, right? It was beautiful, but this place is ethereal. This place is otherworldly.
Yeah.
Right? It's intense, and the music's going, and like some of it's in world, right? Some of it's diegetic, like the elves sing,
right,
almost constantly. And there's these winding stairwells up amongst the trees, and we're taken to essentially the court of Galadriel and her husband, and they descend the stairs, and the light is shining, and everyone is in awe, and it's kind of amazing.
It's still amazing, right? After all these years, it's still incredible to look at.
And then Lady Galadriel shatters Thor's hammer, and wait.
Right. Wait, no, wait. Wait a minute. No, then Celeborn says a bunch of flowery stuff when we meet him, but essentially it comes down to, hey, weren't there supposed to be 9 of you?
Right.
There's only 8. Where's my friend Gandalf? I decided to say, oh man, that thing. And Galadriel is like, it's so interesting how much her presence is meant to, like, creep us out. The Lady of the Light is creepy as hell.
There's an interesting balance there, right? Because she's been around a long time too.
Mm-hmm.
She's a hero of the old days. Man. She's a ring bearer.
You gotta get on that Rings of Power.
I know. And I will.
I know.
But for now, the part of the point is, I think, that she also has been here a long time.
She has history, yeah.
Yeah. And so not unlike Elrond, she thinks very practically, and she's got a lot of power. And when you're just a simple hobbits, that's intense.
Right.
Or poor Boromir. God, the way she looks at Boromir is just... oof.
So the movie began with her voiceover, and we've heard her voice a few other times, including just a moment ago. But this is the first, like, out loud, in-person line of dialogue we get from Galadriel in this movie, answering her husband's question, again, in kind of a creepy fashion, already knowing, saying, Gandalf the Grey did not pass the borders of this land. He has fallen into shadow. Like, oh man. So Legolas says, he was killed by the Balrog, for we went needlessly, he says, into the mines of Moria. But Galadriel, again, back to this, dying in vain and sacrifice, and what does it mean, and the importance of words, corrects Legolas and says, needless were none of the deeds of Gandalf in life. Do not, so you maybe didn't want to go through Moria and you didn't get the result that you wanted, but let us not call it needless. She says, we do not yet know his full purpose. And I love this. This is something that's touched on, I feel like, lightly throughout the movies, and what I've understood a bit more throughout the books, and I think they're getting into it some in the show, but right, is this limit on the ability to know all things, right? Gandalf said earlier in talking to Frodo, you can't know every outcome, and that's why taking a life is an incredibly intense decision to make on your own. And so we're kind of getting back into that. And she has a nice little moment here with Gimli where she says, "Do not let the emptiness of Khazad-dûm fill your heart, Gimli, son of Gloin, for the world has grown full of peril, and in all lands love is now mingled with grief." Which is, again, we've had a lot of, every time it's been elf and dwarf, right, it's been confrontational. And basically she's here saying everyone is feeling pain right now. Everyone needs love right now. And I'm here to be a comfort, where a moment ago it was like, secret witch.
Right. Yeah, I love that she gives almost all of them a bit of hope.
Yeah. Then she stares at Boromir, and boy, does he just not look comfortable. Body acting here from Sean Bean.
Absolutely.
And I love that that's paid off. It didn't necessarily need to be paid off later. It could have just been a look, but we learned that there's even more to it later, that she's speaking to him here because they're all about to be there. She's speaking to all of them. She's like talking out loud and inside each of their heads now.
Right. There's some multitasking going on there. And what she's saying in his head is not mean.
No.
She's not calling him out for being unable to fight the power of the ring.
Right.
She's actually saying, the hope is not lost, and we'll get to it when he says it out loud, but
right. So she looks at Sam and smiles, right? She kind of goes down the line like we were saying, and gives everyone a moment of peace. And then she focuses in on Frodo, as you would, one who has seen the eye.
Ooh. And then it focuses, we get this image of focusing in on her eyes, and they get real wide and her pupils dilate. Ooh.
Mm-hmm.
It's intense.
And then, as you mentioned, we kind of get this scene transition, and everyone's like settling in a little bit, and the elves are singing, and Legolas explains to Merry that it is a lament for Gandalf, which is really beautiful.
Yeah, and Sam says, "I bet they don't mention his fireworks. There should be a verse about them," and then he tries it out. "The finest rockets ever seen, they burst in stars of blue and green, or after thunder, silver showers come falling like a rain of flowers." And he's like, "Oh, that doesn't do him justice." Like, "Nah, Sam, that was pretty good. For off the top of your head rhymes, that was pretty good."
Yeah. And this is another thing worth mentioning that Tolkien does a lot, is rewriting things, right? They're singing a song. How you would think, oh my goodness, how dare he change the source material that way? The elves have their song and they're singing it the way it goes, Sam. How dare you change it? How dare you? But Tolkien does this a lot. He has Merry and Pippin write the hobbits into the Song of the Trees, because he recognizes that sometimes people get left out of stories and then they need to be included. And that's exactly what Sam is doing here. He's saying, I'm sure the elves, and he's not saying the elves' version of the story is wrong and needs to be changed and needs to be different. He's saying there's more to the legend and story of Gandalf the Grey that just the elves or just the dwarves or just humans or all of those people combined would know. They probably don't know about how he would come to the Shire and put on these beautiful displays for us and hang out with us. So we're going to also add our remembrance to him in our way. We're going to be a part of the story too. Everybody gets to be included because inclusion and representation is good, straight from the professor himself.
Yeah, and let's not forget that Tolkien rewrote The Hobbit a couple times to better fit with The Lord of the Rings. He did his own adaptations of his own work. Everyone who's got a problem with black people in Rings of Power needs to shut up.
Well, yeah.
In case we weren't being blunt enough.
Were we being subtle?
It's okay if Ariel's black. Get the fuck over it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, we're good. So next we get another really, I think, wonderful exchange between Aragorn and Boromir, which does a great job of, they're essentially setting up and symbolizing man, right? Humans. as it were, in all of their interesting and nuanced and difficult glory. And Aragorn just tells Boromir he should get some rest, and there's a big long thing that he says, but essentially the side of the long and short of it is he wants to see the glory of Gondor restored, and he starts asking Aragorn, have you ever seen it, the White Tower and all of that? And I love the building to that, which again, watch Rings of Power, but glimmering like a spike of pearl and silver, he says, and all that stuff. Have you ever been called home by the ringing of silver trumpets? He's just getting romantic about home in a way that makes me romantic and nostalgic for this place that I had never seen before.
Sure.
I have now, obviously, but...
Right. Well, and I mean, a lot of us are nostalgic about our homes, right? I mean, you wrote a whole song about it.
Yeah, right. And Aragorn says, I have seen the White City long ago.
I wonder how he did that. Like, not that it would be that he would be unable to do so, but in what capacity? Did he go as Strider? Was he a kid at the time? Or did he do it as an adult? He's older than he looks, so he could have done it maybe even before Boromir's time. Maybe he was an adult and Boromir was a child. Like, I wonder how he did that.
Written somewhere.
I
bet it's written down. Somebody knows. It's in one of those videos, I'm sure. And I love this line from Boromir too, but it's of course tragic when you know what's going to happen. It's sort of Aerith saying, let's come back to the Gold Saucer sometime, but as the real you. There's this kind of envisioning of this glorious moment that we know can never be, where he says, one day our paths will lead us there, back home, and the tower guard shall take up the call. The lords of Gondor have returned.
That is a classic bit of writing advice. I'm pretty sure I've mentioned this before, but if you want to make a character's death tragic, give them a goal. Aerith wants to ride on the airship, and then kill them before they can do it.
Right. And can't you just envision Aragorn and Boromir going in together? You know, like how great that would have been had things gone differently. And then we get, again, the super kind of intense, and like she doesn't, I don't know, she puts me on edge even though she's so amazing and wonderful, right? But Frodo goes out to the spiritual place of thinking,
right? Yeah, follows her. She like wanders by while everyone's asleep,
of course. Strategic wandering. Galadriel's an excellent strategic wanderer. And leads him to a mirror and asks if he'll look, and of course he says, look, I know it's not just going to be a thing where like, oh, hey, look, I look great. Like, what's in the mirror, lady? And she says, even the wisest cannot tell, for the mirror shows many things. God, you thought Gandalf spoke in riddles, kid.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get more like super incredible, awesome visuals, and everyone who's seen it remembers, right, when she like pours the water over the basin and like things get super magical and creepy and cool and weird. She says, things that were, things that are, and some things that have not yet come to pass. Lady, if you're trying to give us all goosebumps, you're doing a fantastic job.
Right. Yeah. And what he sees is interesting, right? Like he sees his friends, and then he sees Hobbiton burning and enslaved by the orcs, and there's a whole like post-credits adventure that we don't get in the movies that I think is probably better left cut out. Because what happens in the books, assuming I remember correctly, is that Saruman, now of the many colors, enslaves the Shire. Right. And so the last adventure the hobbits have to go on is to free the Shire from him. And it feels like just an extra anticlimactic adventure after destroying the One Ring to me. But I know there are people who love it, right? So I kind of like that it gets a call out here, even though it doesn't happen in the movies.
Right.
But the last thing he sees is the eye of Sauron, the burning eye, and he freaks out. And like the ring is being pulled toward the mirror, the water, like it might go to Sauron through the vision of the eye, which is pretty wild. Mm-hmm. And he stumbles backward and puts his hand over it, and Galadriel's like, I know what you saw. Well, then why? Why did you? What's going on? Why are you messing with me?
I'm assuming he had to see it for her to see it.
Maybe so. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that they never really explain how the magic works in this world. For some people, that's really frustrating.
Sure.
By the way, it's funny. We were talking to my Discord the other day about how Tolkien will go for like 3 or 4 pages describing a cabin and all of the food and the layout and the clothes that everyone is wearing. And then like in 2 paragraphs, he'll jump over a battle or,
Sure. Yeah.
And,
it shows where his priority is, right? It's not
totally.
about the big grand gestures. It's about the small things for him.
Right.
In some ways, quite literally.
And so like coming up with an elaborate system to explain like how the magic works, which can be very interesting. And some fantasy storytellers do it incredibly well. But he just didn't really bother.
Right. It's not what he thought was important. And that's fine. The reason we love these stories is because it's Frodo and Sam and Bilbo and Gandalf and the rest of them. And if you want magical world building, read Brandon Sanderson. Read Robert Jordan. Right? Play D&D or Final Fantasy. Now you got magic points. Right? Or memorizing spells. It's not all the same, and it doesn't have to be.
Right. So Galadriel says, it's what's going to happen if you fail. Again, shades of Final Fantasy VII Remake. This is what happens if we fail. And then she says, the fellowship is breaking. It has already begun. He will try to take the ring. And I love that we all knew. The second she said it, they've done it so well. Like, we know. And she says to him, you know of whom I speak.
Yeah. She's talking to us, too.
Right, totally. And no intention to, like, pull a weird WWE move and, like, subvert that, right? Like, and be like, no, actually, it was somebody else. Like, no, it was
Rikishi all along.
Totally, right? What? Why? The high five to the 6 people who get that reference. But, yeah, I think the subversion is that, right, he doesn't like go full bad guy. Is that Boromir's turn is far more interesting than it's not that he becomes a bad guy. It's that he's tempted for just long enough, right, that it costs him and that it to some degree costs the fellowship.
And what I think is especially interesting and what is most motivating to Frodo here is she says, one by one, it will destroy them all. And these are his friends now. Not just the hobbits who he's known all his life, but these are his friends now. There's no way he's going to put them through that. No.
Right. They've been traveling together for months, even though it's only been like 20 minutes of movie time or something.
Right.
Another reason why I think these stories all work better as television shows, by the way. So then Frodo tries this move again, right? He tried it with Gandalf and says, look, this really does feel like it's way over my head. Pun only slightly intended. But, why don't you take the ring? You are clearly way more powerful and capable and knowledgeable and wise than I am. You've lived for thousands of years. Galadriel, cannot you take the ring and destroy it? And he holds it out, right?
Right.
And Galadriel freaks me the F out.
The way Gandalf responded to that was to shout and be like, to explain, I would use it for good. Galadriel's like, oh yeah, I want this so badly.
And again, I know a little bit about, but am learning a lot more about the history of this and the extent to which she has actually, she says this here, but she says, I do not deny that my heart has greatly desired this. Like she's wanted this ring. And even if you've just seen the trailers for Rings of Power, you understand that so far right now in that show, Galadriel, an age earlier from what we're watching now in the movie, has one singular motivation: the destruction of Sauron, or to not let him come back if he's going to come back. You know what? That is her only thing. She can't let this guy win. So of course she would have considered taking the One Ring and using it to destroy him.
Right. And then take his place.
Right.
Wouldn't things be so much better if she ran Middle-earth?
Well, she tells us how they would be because she changes into that. I don't know what it is. This still freaks me out. I remember as a kid, though, being like, oh my God, I didn't know this movie was going to be scary. And the audio goes all, she's like speaking in 3 different tones, or whatever. Her voice is echoing and all that stuff. And she says, in a place of a dark lord, you will have a queen, not dark, but beautiful and terrible as the dawn. Beautiful and terrible as the dawn. Treacherous as the sea, stronger than the foundations of the earth. All shall love me and despair.
Ooh.
Oh my.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not signing up for it, but no, probably
Right.
bad, probably bad,
No,
probably bad.
Yeah. Well, and I think part of the point of these stories is that when one person has all the power, when one person has power over life and death, and who's right and who's wrong, when one person gets to say all the things, then and you leave no room for anybody else, that's where the danger comes in. Right? Tolkien is writing directly in response to fascism, right? Directly in response to what happened after World War I, isn't he?
I mean, he's often denied that it's ever been about one specific thing, but it very clearly impacted everything that he wrote about, and your experiences just impact how you write. And yes, I mean, he clearly prefers nature over industry, those kinds of things. It's not especially subtle. So yes, this is an anti-fascist message, and it is about saying no to ultimate singular power. And in fact, even in the thing that happens next that I'm not sure I understood as well again as a kid, where she just kind of returns to normal and says, I passed the test, I will diminish and go into the West and remain Galadriel. Like, I had no idea what the hell she was talking about. And now I understand that as much as a part of her incredibly long journey in life and quest has been about finding the ring and defeating Sauron, another part of that has been about resisting the temptation of the ring, where other elves and other people have failed, right? And once she passes that test and resists the temptation of the ring, she feels she basically has nothing left to do on Middle-earth but see that Sauron does not rule. And so that could be laid out a little clearer, but I don't know how you stop for exposition right here.
Sure.
So it's fine.
Yeah, I think I passed the test is pretty clear. And I think that's the most important part. Oh, I was tempted. I did not give in. I got to leave it to you. And he's like, I can't do this on my own. And she's like, nah, man. To be a ring bearer, Frodo, is to be alone.
Yeah.
And she shows off her ring, and she explains that she's its keeper. And I don't know what all the rings do. I'm sure they've all got super cool powers.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And not all of them are corrupted. And she says, this task was appointed to you, and if you do not find a way, no one will. So not only will the ring that you bear corrupt all your friends, but you've got to figure out a way to destroy it on your own. What do you think comes next, Mr. Baggins?
Yeah.
And it's so sad as he realizes, and he says it here. He doesn't say all the things he's about to do, but he says,
right.
I know what I must do. I'm just afraid to do it.
Yeah. And then Galadriel states the thesis of the film again. Even the smallest person can change the course of the future. So simply, she puts it.
All right. So, Drew, do you want to have a quick discussion about fantasy races and real-world racism?
Sure. Let's do that.
All right. So, in fact, Wizards of the Coast just ran into trouble with this because they published a book, and they have all sorts of fantasy races, and some of them are anthropomorphic animals. So they have a race of anthropomorphic monkeys, essentially, which would probably be fine. However, some of the art of some of these anthropomorphic monkeys are very, very close to racist caricatures of black people and the sort of minstrel caricature. And they just published this book this year. Like, how have we not learned this lesson? Yeah. And some of it's just a history of, TSR, which published D&D before Wizards of the Coast, didn't always have the greatest history with this. But TSR, Dungeons and Dragons, traces right back to the Lord of the Rings. That was a big inspiration, right? So now we've got our goblins and orcs coded as people of color, because everyone in this movie is white, right? And that's one of the reasons it's so important that the folks in Rings of Power, not everybody is white.
Right.
But the orcs are literally darker skinned.
Yeah.
Right? And they're corrupted elves, as Saruman's about to explain. And that's just, I don't know if Tolkien was actively racist. I have no idea. I have no way of knowing. Maybe somebody does know. Maybe he wrote it down somewhere. But I think it is important to note that when we make the brutish, violence-loving bad guys, this entire race of evil beings, with almost no exception, that it's gonna feel racist even if you don't mean it to. And now we've got, and speaking of parallels to the real world, we've got the fighting Uruk-hai, who are the perfected orcs. So now we got eugenics, right? And as they're being, so he's perfected the race of orcs who were corrupted elves, has Saruman through his eugenics, and now they're all painted with white hands on their faces, with literal white hands, and it's because he's Saruman the White.
Right.
But also there's a white hand on these dark-skinned, brutish people's faces who are just meant to be a eugenics perfect soldier army for this fascist dictator. And man, that is not a good look. Again, I don't know that Tolkien himself specifically is racist, or if he's just following in the tradition of, well, brutish people are like this. And so it is a thing in my own writing, in modern day fantasy writing, to be aware of and to avoid. There's a big conversation now about are Rowling's goblins anti-Semitic? I never would have thought so when I first read the books, but rereading her books, knowing what a horrible transphobe she is, makes me read with a more critical eye. And even if she wasn't being deliberately anti-Semitic, maybe she was influenced by and did not have any knowledge of, did not think about how this might be seen as an anti-Semitic trope to have these money-loving goblins with their big noses, running the banks of the world.
Right.
So it's certainly worth reading through a modern lens as well as through the author's intent, right? We talk about how do you understand literature? Well, you understand it through a variety of lenses, through your own personal understanding of things. What do you bring to the story, and how do you own that story then? But also, what did the author intend, and does that matter to you and your understanding of it? What was the historical context? Tolkien may not have wanted to have his stories be about, fascism, real world fascism, but you got to look at a historical context. What influenced him? Right? And then what other stories influenced him? So now we're going back to the Norse stories that influenced Lord of the Rings. So, I don't know one way or the other that he is specifically racist here, but it's worth looking at through more than one lens.
Yeah, so I think, and again, I'm still learning about a lot of this stuff because I just haven't dived deeply into it at any time in the past. And from what I've read, it does sound like, and this is always one of those, difficult things to deal with, but that Tolkien was progressive for his time. Before we came on here, you and I were having a conversation about George Lucas and Gene Roddenberry. And these guys who are like progressive for their time and have, really come out and done some great things for diversity and forward thinking in fantasy and science fiction storytelling. But Lando Calrissian was the only black guy in the galaxy. And that deserves to be critiqued and said, hey, there need to be more people of color in this world, in the obviously it's a galaxy, but in the fictional world of Star Wars, for one, it to really make any sense at all, and two, just because there just should be. If you want, and George Lucas has agreed, and Disney has agreed, and they've made it so, and it's pissed off all the wrong people, right? All the right people to piss off, if you mean. But yeah,
there it is.
But so I think we've got a bit of that here, where I've talked a little bit how in especially early Final Fantasy, some of their lack of representation or clunky representation is oftentimes, I think, not felt as deeply because the overall message of those games is so overwhelmingly like we all come together in the end versus the one. And I think the same thing kind of applies here, where, like you said, it's coded very poorly. It's something through a modern lens we would say, don't do that. Do everything you can to avoid, like you said, it's a really bad look. I don't think there's intentionality here, though we've often talked about too, is Elrond kind of racist toward the dwarves when he says a couple of these things? And are the dwarves racist back toward the elves? Is that a history of culture and war and all of that? But I do think that multiple times the story is all of the peoples have to come together. The elves and men and hobbits and dwarves all have to come together, right? So it's still, problematic that the orcs are just seen as uniformly bad and coded as dark. And I do think it's more of a, dark is black, is night, is scary, is bad, which is problematic in and of itself, and light is white, is good, is pure, is all of that stuff, right? And I think he was going more for that imagery. And you can also put some of this on Peter Jackson. It's not just, Tolkien wrote that the orcs looked however they looked, but he didn't cast this movie, and he didn't, so the people involved with the films also could have done something to maybe not have the orcs look quite that way or be so uniform. Or I think, as we've talked about, the better answer, which is why it's so funny that this stupid conversation is happening now about Rings of Power, the better answer to that is probably just to have a lot more people of many different colors represented in the good guys. So it's not that the only people that have dark skin are evil. That's just not good for your movie, your show, your video game, anything, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
One other thing about the creation of the Uruk-hai here that I don't think is made explicitly clear, but again, if you've been paying close attention, you'll notice like the big difference from a practical standpoint is that they can go out in the sun.
Right, yeah. The orcs definitely avoid the sun, and the trolls turn to stone in the sun.
Right.
Yeah, so the Uruk-hai do not suffer that particular weakness.
Saruman goes and tells them to taste man flesh, which is that you know what, never mind.
Easy now.
Now. Let's not open that can of worms. All right.
You got all sorts of metaphors.
Goodness. And then Saruman turns to, I guess, the captain of the Uruk-hai.
Sure, yeah.
I guess they've got structure of that variety, which you would need to have in an army. And he says that one of the halflings carries something of great value. So he says, bring that to me, but then kill the rest of them. Which is a good in-world practical reason why they don't just murder the hobbits when they find them. So we scene transition back to Elfland with all of our heroes, and Celeborn is speaking, and all of the fellowship is lined up, and it's clear that they're getting ready to depart, and they're giving gifts, right? And the giving of gifts in these stories is always totally underrated. And Celeborn says, may these cloaks help shield you from unfriendly eyes, and mentions that never before have they had to clad strangers in the garb of their own people, which, again, gives this a sort of historical weight and importance, right? Makes it feel much cooler. So now everyone's got neat-looking cloaks. So again, our RPG heroes get an equipment upgrade. They get to, I haven't seen if they're plus to dexterity. I guess, actually, shield you from unfriendly eyes. So that's going to be plus to your stealth. And actually, we do that later, right?
Oh, yeah. We'll see a practical application of the camouflage these cloaks can provide.
Yeah. Then you gotta, stack them up with some supplies, and Legolas explains lembas, which there's a whole video from In Deep Geek on lembas and how it works. Elvish bread that one small bite is enough to fill your stomach and all that stuff. And apparently there's a whole history to this bread.
Yeah, and Orlando Bloom as Legolas takes the most dainty elven bite of this bread.
Right.
It's just the bare corner. Oh, man.
One pinky up and everything. I don't know, but, and
and
then
of
I
course,
love that right after he
yeah.
explains that you barely need any of it, Merry looks at Pippin and says, well, how many did you eat? He says, 4.
Yeah.
That one's funny. Some of them are groaners, some of them are eye rollers from Merry and Pippin. That one's legit. That holds up. So Celeborn and Aragorn walk through the trees to have, an important conversation really quick, and explains that, the orcs wearing a white symbol have been seen, so they've seen the Uruk-hai. They're out in the sun, so you guys are in extra trouble, just so you know. And then we go back to the better gift giver. Galadriel's just got to totally outdo her husband. He's like, here's some cloaks and here's some bread.
Right.
And they're like, cool.
Yeah.
And then she gets to give my gift for you, Legolas, is a bow of the Galadrim, worthy of all the skill of our woodland kin. Like, wow, that is a huge weapon boost upgrade. That's like plus 15 to attack, plus 35 to magic. I'm going to say at least a plus 10 to dexterity. Like, big upgrade here for Legolas. Merry and Pippin get some really neat little daggers, she says. The daggers of the Nolodrin or some crap.
Right. Well, again, everything's got a history, right? Even if these daggers don't have special names, there are special kinds of daggers that have already seen war, right?
Yeah.
So again, an upgrade.
Yes. And I love that she spoils Peregrine Took's arc here. You will find your courage, she says. Do not fear. I love it. Yes, he will. Yes, he will. And you, Samwise, here's a rope.
Look, you remember, what was that movie? Boondock Saints? You and your fucking rope?
Name one thing we're going to need a stupid fucking rope for.
Yeah, but it's important. And you know what? Any D&D veteran will tell you somebody on the team needs to have 50 feet of rope.
Yeah.
You need good rope because you don't know when you're going to have to scale down the cliffs or climb up the ruins or who knows what, tie up the enemy. You need good rope, and this is the best rope.
Oh, good rope. But Sam does wonder if she's got any more of those nice shiny daggers.
And she's not at all offended. She's like, no, I get it. But
I get
trust
it,
me,
but
I've been on more than one adventure, Sam. She's a veteran D&D player, if ever there was one.
Right. Gonna want that rope, kid. And then this exchange is so cute and adorable and lovely, even though I didn't fully understand it at all until, again, I watched one of those videos. But she asks Gimli, what gift would a dwarf ask of the elves? Looks down and says, nothing.
I'm fine. Man, he's turned around on the elves pretty fast, or at least this particular elf.
Right.
And you know what? Yeah, good. Because we can't have... Like, Waka needs his turnaround, right? Like, Gimli can't hate the elves forever, or we're just going to hate them.
Right.
And so, yeah, I love that.